I am kneeling here on the sharp gray gravel by the sailor bulkhead, pressing a single copper penny against a narrow vertical crack in the stone foundation. You can hear the light clink as the metal hits the masonry. This gap, where the old wood frame meets the stone, looks no wider than a blade of summer grass, but when I push the coin, it slides all the way into the dark void until my knuckles touch the framing. It meets no resistance at all. That tells me everything I need to know. If a penny can slip in edgewise, a field mouse can walk right into my home without even brushing its whiskers. We call this the Penny Exclusion Test, and it is the most reliable way to find where your house is vulnerable before the nights turn truly cold. A mouse only needs a gap of about 1/4 of an inch, or 6 millimeters, to enter. That is about the thickness of 2 pennies stacked together. Today, I will show you how to walk your own foundation to find these secret openings and seal them permanently using a Steel-Masonry Graft. We are going to use a combination of stainless steel mesh and hydraulic cement to create a plug that stays harder than the teeth of any rodent. This method is best suited for those of you with older foundations made of brick, stone, or block. It is a way to stop the problem before it starts. However, you must listen for one thing. If you already hear the scratching of tiny feet inside your ceiling or find evidence in the pantry, do not seal these holes yet. Trapping a nest of mice inside your walls will only lead to chewed electrical wires and a smell that lingers for a month. We are working to keep the scouts out while they are still in the tall grass. I remember back in 1949 helping my father move the Hubbard squashes into the cool darkness of the cellar. They were heavy, blue-gray things that smelled of the damp garden soil. We thought the harvest was safe behind those thick stone walls, but the foundation had shifted just a hair over the summer. By the time the first snow fell, the mice had already claimed the best of the crop. Father taught me then that a home is only as tight as its smallest crack. You have to get down on your knees to see what is really coming. Father led me down the cellar stairs, carrying a kerosene lantern that cast swaying shadows across the rows of Hubbard squashes. He picked up a large blue-gray fruit and showed me a hole gnawed through the warty skin. The scouts had already claimed our winter stores before the first frost. He didn't hunt for the mice. Instead, he held the light to the corner where the lime mortar had crumbled into gray sand. He pointed to a sliver of daylight and told me a mouse doesn't need a doorway, only a place for its nose to start. I used this stiff, bristled radiator brush to prepare the foundation. You must clear away the dried mud and the thick, sticky spiderwebs that gather in these corners over the summer. If you don't scrub down to the bare stone, you will miss the very entry point you are looking for. A gap often hides behind a bit of debris, and the cement I will use later cannot bond to a dusty or mossy surface. I work the long bristles deep into the joints, feeling for any spot where the brush slips into the wall further than it ought to go. It is hard to believe when you look at a plump field mouse, but their bodies are built for vanishing into the smallest spaces. The skull is the only part of the animal that does not compress. If that hard bone passes through an opening, the rest follows right behind. Their ribs are flexible enough to flatten against the spine as they squeeze. Health officials and university researchers confirm that a house mouse needs only a 1/4-inch gap, roughly the width of a pencil eraser, to gain entry. That is why we use the penny for our evidence. We aren't looking for a big round hole. By the time an opening is the size of a golf ball, the house is already a highway for a whole colony. We are hunting for those thin, vertical slits where the foundation has settled or the wooden sill plate has shrunk. A mouse uses its whiskers to feel the escaping warmth from these cracks. If the penny slides in edgewise, even if the opening looks too narrow for a creature with fur, the scouts will be through it by the next full moon. A mouse is a heat seeker by nature. As the ground cools, the warmth from your furnace or stove leaks through these tiny fissures, creating a scent trail that a rodent follows with its sensitive whiskers. They are thigmotactic, meaning they prefer to keep their bodies pressed against a solid surface while they move. A vertical crack in a foundation provides a protected, warm path that leads straight to a food source. My brother Abraham, who spent years laying block, once told me that a mouse will worry at a single crumb of loose mortar for half a night if it detects a draft of indoor air on the other side. This grafting method is for those with foundations of fieldstone, brick, or concrete block. If your home sits on a modern poured slab, you might not have cracks in the masonry, but you must still look where the plumbing and electrical lines pierce the walls. Those entry points are often oversized and lack proper seals. However, this is not a solution for a house that is already overrun. If you have an active colony nesting in your insulation, sealing the exterior now will only force them to chew new holes through your baseboards or electrical wiring to find a way out. To do the job right, I keep a few specific materials in my bucket. I use stainless steel wool or copper mesh rather than the common steel wool from the hardware store. Standard steel wool is too soft and will rust, leaving ugly orange streaks down your foundation after the first rain. The stainless variety stays bright and is far more abrasive to a rodent's mouth. You will also need hydraulic cement, which differs from regular mortar because it expands as it cures. This expansion creates a pressurized seal that locks the metal mesh into the stone. I always wear thick work gloves to handle the mesh and a mask when mixing the cement to avoid breathing the fine silica dust. I also carry a spray bottle of water. Since old masonry is porous, it will pull the moisture out of your patch too quickly if the surface is dry, causing the cement to shrink and fail. We need that stone damp so the new work can truly take hold and bond with the original wall. I start my walk at the north corner of the house, where the air stays damp and the moss often hides the fine lines in the masonry. I move slowly along the foundation, stooping low with my bucket and brush. This first pass is about clearing the path. I take that radiator brush and scrub the area where the siding meets the stone until the grit stops falling into my eyes and I can see the true condition of the joints. You cannot skip the cleaning. If there is a layer of dust or a spider's egg sac between your patch and the stone, the winter frost will simply pop your work right out of the wall like a loose tooth. Now I take my penny and run it along the bottom edge of the sill plate. This is where the wooden frame of your house rests on the masonry. It is the most common place for a gap because wood and stone expand at different rates. When the penny slips into a crack, I don't just stop there. I slide it sideways to see how long the opening is. If it's a short crack, a single plug will do. If the penny slides freely for 6 inches, I know I have a larger job that requires a long ribbon of mesh. This is the moment you decide how much material to prepare. I use the edge of the coin to measure the depth of the void, so I know how far back I need to pack my filler. I pull a length of stainless steel wool from the roll, about the size of a large hen's egg, for a typical foundation crack. I do not use scissors. I just pull it apart with my gloved hands. I roll the fibers between my palms until I have a firm cylindrical plug. Using the tip of a flathead screwdriver, I shove this metal plug deep into the opening. You want it packed so tightly that you cannot feel the back of the void. If the hole is wide, I use a second or third piece of mesh until the entire cavity is stuffed full. The goal is to leave about a 1/4 inch of space between the surface of the mesh and the face of the stone. This creates a pocket where the cement can later lock onto the metal fibers. Before I open the cement, I use my spray bottle to soak the stone inside and around the gap. You want the masonry to look dark and wet, but without water dripping out. Now I mix the hydraulic cement. I start with just 2 cups of the dry powder in my small bucket and add water a tablespoon at a time. It goes from a dry dust to a soupy mess very quickly, so you must be careful. I aim for a consistency like thick, chunky peanut butter. It should hold its shape on the putty knife without sliding off. Because this cement sets in less than 10 minutes, I only mix what I can use for 3 or 4 gaps at a time. I take a dollop of the wet cement on my knife and press it firmly into the gap, right over the top of the steel wool. I don't just skim the surface, I push hard so the cement oozes into the mesh. This creates the graft where the metal and masonry become one solid unit. Once the hole is filled, I use the flat of the blade to smooth the patch so it sits flush with the rest of the foundation. If the stone is rough-hewn, I might use an old sponge to dab the wet cement, matching the texture so the repair disappears into the wall. When I come to a place where a pipe or a wire enters the house, the decision is different. I cannot just plug a wire that might need to be replaced later. For these, I wrap a 3-inch wide strip of the stainless mesh around the pipe itself, securing it with a bit of copper wire. Then I build my cement collar around that mesh. This leaves the pipe protected but allows for the natural vibration of the plumbing. By the time I finish the south side of the house, the first patches on the north side are already turning a light, dry gray. I can feel the strength in them when I tap them with my knuckle. I have seen a neighbor seal every gap in his cellar only to find himself in a worse fix a week later. If you hear the frantic patter of feet above your head or smell that sharp, sour odor of a nest, you must set your traps inside for at least 14 days before you reach for the cement bucket. Sealing those creatures in will not make them vanish. A trapped mouse becomes desperate and will gnaw through your electrical insulation or your drywall to find a new path. Worse yet, if they cannot escape, you will be left with the smell of decay deep inside your walls where no scrubbing brush can reach it. You must clear the house of its current guests before you lock the doors. When you are handling these materials, you have to respect what they can do to your own skin and lungs. That gray dust in the cement tub contains silica and lime. When I mix it, I often notice a dry, chalky taste in the back of my throat if my mask isn't tight. That lime is caustic. If you get it on a sweaty arm and leave it there, it will draw the moisture right out of your skin and leave a stinging burn. I keep a bucket of clean water nearby just to rinse my hands, and I never handle the stainless mesh without my leather gloves. Those fine metal fibers are like 1,000 tiny needles that have a way of working themselves into your skin where you cannot see them but will feel them every time you make a fist. Do not expect this afternoon's work to be the end of the story for as long as you own the home. A building is a living thing. It groans and stretches as the seasons turn. Here in the valley, the frost can drive deep into the ground, lifting the earth and shifting the heavy foundation stones just enough to open a new seam. A patch that is tight this September might show a hairline fracture by next April. I make it a habit to do a slow walk with my Penny every year when the corn is being cut. If you find a patch has popped loose, it is usually because the stone wasn't damp enough when you applied the cement, or the house has settled further. You can help your foundation work by looking at what sits against it. I often see firewood stacked right up against the siding or heavy mulch piled high to keep the weeds down. To a mouse, that firewood is a sturdy ladder and a safe place to hide from the hawks while they sniff out a way into your pantry. I keep a clear zone of at least 12 inches, nothing but bare dirt or clean river gravel, all the way around the perimeter. It forces a mouse to cross open ground to reach your walls. A mouse hates feeling exposed. If they have to run across a foot of empty gravel where an owl might see them, they are much more likely to stay out in the tall grass where they belong. Finally, you must recognize when a gap is more than just a doorway for a rodent. If you find a crack that is wider than my thumb and runs diagonally through your brickwork or block, you might be looking at a structural failure rather than a bit of settling. My brother Abraham always warned against patching over a foundation that is actively bowing or crumbling. If the masonry feels soft like wet sand when you scrub it, or if you see the wall leaning inward, you need a professional mason's eyes on it. This method is for maintenance and exclusion, but it won't hold a falling house together. I walk back to the cellar bulkhead now that the sun has dipped behind the tree line and the cement has had time to harden. I take that same copper penny and press it firmly against the rough gray patch where the crack once lived. Instead of sliding out of sight, the metal coin gives a sharp, dry click against the masonry and falls back into the gravel at my feet. That sound is a small but certain victory. It is the proof of a boundary restored. You don't need a shelf full of harsh chemical sprays to keep your pantry quiet through the winter. You only need to be more thorough than the scout trying to find a way in. There is a particular kind of peace that comes with this chore. I look out at the fields and see the harvest moving along, and I know that when the ground finally freezes, the mice will find this house as solid as a mountain. Esther can reach into her flour bin without a second thought, and I won't have to spend my winter mornings resetting traps in the dark corners of the crawl space. This is stewardship in its simplest form. We are looking after the wood and stone that shelter us from the elements. By closing these tiny entries, you are protecting your wiring and your peace of mind before the first real chill sets in. I would be glad to hear how your own perimeter walk goes. If you find a spot that is particularly troublesome, perhaps where an old chimney meets the siding or near an abandoned cistern, tell me about the material you are working with. Sharing those details helps our neighbors recognize the same weak points in their own homes. Whether you have hand-laid fieldstone or modern brick, the results of your penny test remain the best guide. Next time, we will turn our eyes toward the rafters. We need to check the attic insulation for the heat leaks that draw visitors toward your roofline before the snow flies. Stay frugal, stay free.